Hello and welcome to another free code session. My name is Jason Bach and I'm doing this video where I don't really plan on doing any coding. I'm just going to show you some stuff that I've updated, fixed recently in Rocks, and I'm doing it with the Camtasia Recorder 2022. I did post a bug, found out that I had at least 3 crashes with it because I had to get the crash dump files, and I uploaded one of them along with some driver information, and they said, you might want to update your drivers, basically. And they said in the nice way. And I thought, yeah, I haven't updated my drivers in quite a long time. So that was sort of on me. So I updated drivers, and now I'm doing this as a test because they said, hey, let it record something. Let's see if it works. The thing is, I can't just record something for a minute or two. It seemed like the longer I did a video, that's when it would crash. So I'm going to give this a try. And if I keep looking over here, that's why, because I'm just watching it to see, did it die or not? I think my peripheral vision has been trained now to watch for that to see if it kind of goes, oops. In fact, I'm going to move this over just a little bit. So it's right on the edge. And so hopefully I can, see that really well. Anyway, so it's kind of a test to see if that fixes things or not. And if it doesn't, I'm gonna have to start it up again and then complain about how it crashed and send them another bug report. So that's one thing. So what I'm going to do is talk about some of the features that have been, not features, but things that have been fixed, added, updated, however you want to call it. A couple things to note though, and the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to look at, where is this? This is, you can see one of the changes here on Rocks is that I now put a change log in, okay? And so we're going to kind of go through the things in 6.4.5 and talk about what are some of the things that have changed. The other thing is the README file that you just saw, that is now in the package. So I didn't know you could do that until I just stumbled across it a day or two ago. So if I go look up Rocks, you'll see that now, if I don't go through the versions, if I go through the README, it now picks it up and it's there, okay? So, yeah, you got to keep finding out ways to make NuGet packages fabulous. And this is one of them. So, or a couple of them. So, what are some of the things that did change? And even though I just fixed these, I'm going to have to think a little bit about, oh yeah, what was that? Okay. So, I had stopped recording. My plan was to stop recording with all the things that I had fixed from a bug standpoint and error standpoint. And that's what I put in for 6.4.4. Okay. Then I went back and I said, okay, there are warnings there. How do I address these warnings? Do I actually try to fix things or not? And I did fix a couple, and they were kind of interesting. So I want to talk about these in a little bit more detail. So the first thing is methods that have the DoesNotReturn attribute are now mocked such that they will throw a DoesNotReturn exception. So what do I mean by that? So let's go through the code base and see, I know I have a test of this somewhere. I just want to say, let's say match case. I don't necessarily have to match whole word only. I know I have some tests around this. You can see a lot of the code has it. Did I make an integration test? No, I did not. So we can at least see a generator test, and now I'll give you an idea as to what it does. Okay. This does remind me though, I'm going to make a note to say we need an integration test for this because I don't think we have it. So I'll put that in notes. Need to add test integration test for. Okay, so this attribute is kind of interesting because it has to do with nullable analysis. And when you put this attribute on a method, what you're saying is it never returns. And this is typically to say that that method will throw an exception, okay? What threw me first, and I didn't save all my notes that I was taking as I was going through these. I should have been maybe just a little bit more diligent and put some notes together. It's always fun to archive those. But anyway, whatever type it was that was showing this, I got a little confused at first because it was on a method that had a void. I thought voids don't return. So why would you put that on a method? Well, voids, then I realized void methods do return. You just don't see it in C# code. You can say in a void method, return. Typically you don't. But if you look in the IL, every method returns. It's just that with a void method, you don't have to say that. You're not actually returning a value. Okay. So you could, say maybe we should have had a actual void type. There is actually a void type in .NET, but you never do anything with it. Anyway, point is, does not return means it literally will not return. Okay. Now, this was causing a warning that started to mess with the nullable analysis and saying that I can't remember what the actual message was. Well, I thought I had it in the changelog notes. Yes. So, and the funny thing is, if you look up this error message, what you're going to find is, well, this is not Microsoft's site, but this is just a bug related to it, which doesn't really help. So it's kind of an odd one in that it doesn't really help much when you go look it up. And when you click on it, there's no help for it. So it's like, but that was the error. Okay. And I believe, yes, it says a method marked does not return should not return. And so, which was confusing me because I'm like, where this was coming up, the method wasn't returning. Well, technically you have to say that you literally cannot, you have to get out of the method, not by just normal code path or whatever. So I thought about it, and what I came up with is to say, if you have a method that does not return either a void or an int, there's no rule around this to say, does the method actually return something or not? Because it's not looking at the return type. What I actually did is I made a couple notes for transpire to say, if you call a method that has does not return, consider adding an exception handler around it, because in all likelihood, it's probably going to throw an exception, or that's what it should do. Yeah. And then if you have a method that's actually returning something other than void, you shouldn't put this attribute on it because it doesn't really make sense. Does not return methods should just be void, but that's a different point. What I decided to do is change this in a couple of ways. In the generated code, what you'll see is once we get down to here and we do increment call count and any handlers and callbacks or anything else, I throw a does not return exception. Okay. Now, if the method has a base virtual method, you'll see I still call that, and that should have does not return on it, which then we're relying upon it doing what it says it's going to do. And then that would be back to you as the caller of the method. If it doesn't, then we also, I believe, throw does not return exception. I thought I had a test in that somewhere here. When we get down to interfaces, yes, we'll see what that does because they don't have a base call. Okay. Well, unless they're dimmed. So anyway, so that's what this does here. Same thing here, though. I discard the return values, but I still call any of the callbacks and return value things because I'm like, those may have effects that you want to keep. So I've decided to still call them. I just ignore the return, and then I throw does not return exception. Okay. Now I do say here return base int method. I could do a discard here. That's actually a good point. I'm going to make a note of that. So I'm going to say for a does not return method that returns a value and has a virtual base implementation, I should discard the base result. Right now it does this. Okay. And we'll just put those in quotes, even though that's not markdown-ish. Does this, it should do this. It doesn't really matter other than you're doing the right thing to say a discard means I really don't care about what the return value is at all. Okay. but now the warning will go away. Okay. This also works for makes in that they just throw it. Doesn't matter anything. Makes are pretty easy to update. If you look at the ones with interfaces, I believe, yeah, if we don't get an expectation, we still throw expectation, but here we would do that. If we don't get an expectation here, same thing. So that's what this one does. Okay. So if you have a method marked as does not return, expect to get an exception. You could arguably say that if the method never returns, it just spins in a while loop, but that'd be really bad. Okay. So that's the first one. Let's look at the next one. And ta-da. If the mock type is an interface and it contains methods that match accessible methods from the object type, think equals from IEquatable. The methods will be implemented in the mock explicitly. This was a fun one. And it actually came up because of the way I was doing the code generation test. Let me actually show you that. So if I go to code generation test and I look at what's being done to generate the type here, down here, get type definition, is that I'll stick in object if you give me a generic type and it's not needs a value type or something like that. This is actually critical to having this show up, because if I would have put string in here or something like that, I would not have seen this. Okay, so it's just lucky happenstance. That sometimes happens in coding. But what was ending up is that you have interfaces like IEquatable that if you implement it, you typically would implement IEquatable of T like this. Let me get an example up in SharpLab. So if I have, let's go to SharpLab IO, and if I say here, like, let's make C implement IEquatable of C. Okay, that's how you would typically do it. And then I'm going to say implement it, and there you go. Okay, and then you would implement it as you see fit. You would not typically put in here like string. That would be very weird. Although there's nothing to stop you from saying a type can implement multiple IEquatables of multiple different types. Okay, but typically the pattern is you're going to put in the self. Okay, and yeah, so in any event, if IEquatable is constrained to be IEquatable of T, I think that's the way you do it, then that would have worked, but that's not what happens here. But what's interesting, if you make that T an object, then you're going to get a method here that's equals of object question mark, because it's a nullable. And that collides with the object method that's on the object type. And even if you have an interface, like you're just mocking IEquatable, the thing is, that has a base type of object, even though the interface doesn't. The mock type definitely does, and we have to consider that the mock will be having a base type of object. And so we can't collide with them. Okay, so do I have tests around this? Of course I have tests around it. What kind of monster do you think I am? If we go to generators here and I go to object methods and interfaces, I think that's, yeah, this will show it. So if they either match exactly or they're only by return type, it doesn't matter. If I have an interface like this, you'll notice that when I get down here, all of them are explicitly implemented. So you're going to have to cast the object to an explicit method because, or explicit type, because that's the way to get to these. Otherwise, you're going to end up calling the one an object, and that's not what you want. But this lets it happen and gets rid of the warning, especially with the other one up here too, with reference equals. That's a static method on object. So I first thought it was just the virtual instance ones, but no, if it's any of the members that are on object that are accessible, then we have to make sure that we are making our implemented mock methods that match it, either by return type, diff by return type only, or exact, that they are implemented explicitly. Okay, so that fixed that problem. Okay, and then what's next? Properties with the AllowNull. This is funny. This is actually really hilarious. Hilarious in an odd way. Hold on, I'm going to pause for a second. I want to find an article that I wrote because I actually had solved this and I forgot. Okay, so this is an article I wrote for Rocket Mortgage, the company I work for, on their technology blog. And if you look at the date, that's almost 2 years ago. Okay, so what's interesting about this article is it's the exact same problem, but this is when I was doing rocks with reflection, and then that would generate the C# code, and then the compiler API would only do one small thing. It would just compile the code from that and emit an assembly. That's it. Only later, when source generators were added to C# did I actually involve the compiler API a lot more. Okay, but this was the same problem. And as I started to try to fix this one, I'm like, wait a minute, where have I seen this before? I know I've seen this before somewhere. Okay, and that's when I remember the article I wrote. Did you ever hear that from somebody saying, the reason I write blog articles or stuff is because I want to find the problem. I want to run into the problem later, or I end up running into the problem later. And then I look it up and I find that I've already written an article on it. So anyway, so the problem is with this, if I go back to AllowNull, is that when you put AllowNull on an attribute, I'm sorry, not the attribute, on a property, it doesn't actually end up existing on the property itself. But it's subtler than even the article I found. If it's on an interface with a getter and setter, it ends up as a parameter property on the value parameter of the set method. Okay, but if it's virtual, then it ends up on the getter, and it's just bizarre because you need that attribute to end up on the property that is on the mock. And not only that, but you also need to do, let's see if I can find this off the top of my head. AllowNull generator tests is if you do something like this, okay, and the code's in there that fixes it. But what's interesting is that when you call the setter, you'll notice that I have an exclamation point here because this is expecting it to be a string. And I didn't want to go through the, oh my God, this has to be like a funkus string up here, but an argument of string question mark and what about indexers and all that code. I just basically say, hey, if the setter has an AllowNull on the last parameter, because on an indexer the value is at the end, and for a setter it's technically the first and the last. Okay, so I say for that one, if it is an AllowNull, just put an exclamation point here and here, and it still works. You're still saying I'm going to pass in a null. Okay, and so I'm kind of expecting the user to remember, oh yeah, this had AllowNull on it, but this gets rid of the warning. Okay, and then one bug that I fixed while I was doing this AllowNull was that the verify method that I had was causing an issue. Okay, and the issue was, if I can remember, it's member. It's like get member identifier. I thought it was. Is it this one? Yeah. It is this one. Okay. I remember it was something like this. So yeah, I don't care if navigate to is whatever. This was always assuming for some bizarre reason that this was a single or default. But on a property, there are two member identifiers if you have a get and a set, or if you have a get and a net, but definitely get and set. And I looked at this, I'm like, why did I do that? Because you're already giving the identifier. When I go call this through verify, I know what the key is because I've looked that up. So I have no idea why I did it this way or that way. Now I fixed it. It basically says, give me all of them, where I make sure they're not null, and the identifier that I pass in is the value that is in the attribute, and then it works. So that was one that also came up by happenstance. That was just lucky that I found it. It was a bug that had been sitting there for I don't really know how long. Let's see if I go to Git and say view history in this file. It had been sitting in there for at least 6 months, if not longer. Because I bet if I look, yeah, it's always been there from day one since I made this 2 years ago. when I started actually doing the source generator approach with this, that's probably when this came in. So almost 2 years of a bug sitting there that I never found. And that's where, you know, I was talking to a friend of mine today at lunch, where you can't just hope to say, we're going to build a bunch of stuff and then throw it out there, and then we'll address the bugs that people find, and then we'll move on to new features. Because it is inevitable that your code has bugs. Nobody is going to convince me otherwise. I don't care what user says a developer should never write bugs in software, or a developer that says I write bug-free code. You're full of it, or your expectations are full of it. Either way, there's bugs. Okay. That doesn't mean we give up, but it just means that there are cases that we sometimes don't think about. And that's like tools like Striker, a mutation testing tool, would be fun to throw at rocks. I'd have no idea how it would work. If it would just completely bust or not, I don't know. But it might be a fun experiment just to try it on rocks. I don't think I ever did. Maybe I did. I'm not sure. But, you know, it's really hard, to, especially as a code base gets more complex. And this code base is starting to get pretty complex. I need to see, like, I know there's code clones in Visual Studio. I don't know if that would work on, if that really works anymore, but it would be nice to try, because I know there's places where I'm potentially copying and pasting code, and maybe I can pull that in there. But also some of these are getting really complicated in terms of just all the cases that they have to keep in mind as I'm generating code. So, you know, that's just the problem space. That's what it is. But when you start getting something that's really complicated, it's really important to have that set of tests around there. And to that point with this code generation test here, I'm thinking of actually putting in something that says, you know, I'm not just going to have these types in here. I'm going to start to incorporate types from other packages that are out there that I think do very complicated things, and see what they can bring to the table in terms of things that, you know, it can be a little squirrely because I don't own those, and I don't own these either. This test is kind of an outlier in that it really should be run as a console app type of thing. And now that I talk about this, I'm starting to think that code generation tests is, I like it as a unit test because it has it come along for the ride, but it's also a little time consuming because it actually has to do a lot to make this work. So while I'm talking, I think I'm going to say this as a note. And this is good. I'm glad I'm doing this because talking through this is, as you can see, is bringing up a couple of things. Consider making code generation tests a console app that I run as needed for investigations. You know, I kind of think that's probably the right way to do this. Rather than as a test, I just have to remember to run it, especially when I get to C# 11 and .NET 7. But then I can, you know, it doesn't stop a release from going per se. This is just me running this once in a while and going, hey, did I break anything? Hey, did anything change in the compiler or the analysis rule set that suddenly says, hey, this is an error or this is a warning? That can happen as well. So I think I'm going to do that. So, and one other thing, since I've been thinking about things, I'm going to say, look at reducing unnecessary usings. I've noticed in some of the generated code, when I've taken it and put it into like in Visual Studio or something like that here, that I'll get some of the usings that are coming in as saying they're not necessary. And I thought with namespace, the namespace gatherer, that I'm only adding namespaces that I know I need. Well, apparently I'm putting in too many. Okay. So I at least want to look at that. It's not an error. Even if they are there, they're just unnecessary. But I should only be as explicit as I possibly need to be. So that might be something else I look at. Well, I still haven't crashed the recorder, so that's good. And I went for about 25 odd minutes here, so something like that. So that's good too. So at this point, all my focus now in this library is going to be on the C# 11 features and making sure that I am addressing things as needed. There is an issue I put in about ref-like types, span of T. They work, but it does feel a little squirrely and inconsistent. And I want to revisit that and say, is that something that I should do that makes it a little bit cleaner and a little bit easier to maintain and consistent? But other than that, that's not a bug per se. So I'm going to probably withhold, unless somebody's using this and they're hung up on a bug, that somebody's going to say, oh my God, if you don't fix this, my company is going to be, $1 billion plus company is going to go under. Then I'm going to be like, well, first of all, that ain't my problem. This is free to use. So MIT license, but I'm not going to dedicate my whole life to fixing your bug or my bug. And you can always give me a PR, or you can pay me to fix it if it's really that important. But yeah, nobody really uses this, but that's okay. I've said numerous times, this is more for me to learn more about C# and .NET. I am surprised, and always pleasantly surprised, at what I learn every time I try to dive a little bit deeper and put in a new feature or do something different. But my focus is, from this point on, this is the end of June. So July, August, September, October, November. I got 5 months to see if I can get into C# 11 features and not just support them, but support them in a good way. So that's what I'm going to be working on from now on with Rocks. Those other projects I've done before, I want to get those updated as well. Other things, I want to add new features, and I keep saying it, there's so much to do. There's so much to explore. There's so much to dive into, and that's what makes programming and software development fun. I thought about this yesterday. That's really the thing that makes me keep coming back to this. It's this ability to explore all these things, come up with cases. I bet people could come up with interfaces that would break Rocks, some crazy inheritance scheme or overloading member scheme that would break what Rocks does. I'm sure that's out there. And that would be fun then to fix and go, how do I fix this? There's just other things out there that I've never even touched, and it would be fun to explore those things. So much to do. And I really enjoy doing all this stuff. That's the value add for me here. I don't make money off of this per se, and if I could, that'd be great. But really the value that I get out of this is the educational experience, and that in turn keeps me ahead of things, on top of things, and that overall is a payoff. So next episodes, we'll probably be getting into C# 11 stuff and Rocks and other things. Thank you all for watching. Leave comments and questions below. See you in the next episode.